Hi, I'm Dr. J9 and welcome into the show. This is the Dr. Janine Show, and today we're talking all about hidden secrets of how to deal with pandemic anxiety. And this is something that we can all relate to, I think, after the past 6 months that we've all been through this very unique situation, and that whole term of, yes, we've all been in this together. Have we really? That's a good question. So I want you to chime in. I will be answering questions and hopefully shouting out anybody who is watching today. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and on YouTube as well. And we have a special guest, which I'm so excited about. We have an expert in the area of happiness. Dr. Jillian Mandich will be joining us, which I'm so excited about. We're talking about happiness and how that may be, and this is going to be one of my questions to Jillian, can this help to counteract anxiety, which is our topic today, and how do we make ourselves happy? Is this even possible? So make sure you stay tuned right through this show today. I'm so excited that we are live in the studio. So when things are happening that shouldn't be happening on the cameras and with audio and stuff, you're going to bear with me today because this is a completely new experience and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'd love to hear from you as well and tune into the show. So what is anxiety? And I'm going to talk about the brain and how the loops in the brain can sort of be hot-wired or even hijacked for anxiety, and this can take over our brain. So as much as we have those impulses that are coming into our stimulus, right, and we're getting bombarded. So certainly, I know through the pandemic, for those of you who are hooked to the televisions and, watching the news and having all of these inputs, and we're going to be talking about the inputs and how we can hopefully, help our inputs. But if you're watching the news a lot and this was happening in terms of what was going on in the world, it was definitely possibly having a negative impact on your inputs, and certainly then causing this whole feedback loop as to what was going on. So we're going to go to the brain and we're going to show you exactly what's happening. So when we talk about the amygdala, so the amygdala, and this is after the word almond, and that's how the word amygdala came about, but the amygdala is a part of the limbic system in the brain, and this is right here, and there's two amygdala and they have different nuclei, and the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain. Okay, let's just make sure I'm getting that right. I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but this is the emotional and the limbic part of the brain. And what can happen now is that with stress and anxiety is that there's this feedback loop that happens. And ideally what happens is that the amygdala, being that going into that fight or flight response, the best case scenario is that then this will go to the prefrontal cortex, and that is the reasoning part of the brain, and then the reasoning part of the brain will be able to say, oh, I don't know if that's an actual threat. Is this something that's really going to kill me? And what happens though in anxiety is that, yes, that prefrontal cortex, so the front part of the brain, should be able to have that reasoning ability and say, okay, no, I'm okay, I'm going to be okay. But the more impulses that we have and that input that comes in as that stress, so we're watching the news and we're seeing all the doom and the gloom and the fear and the fear mongering and the fear of missing out, which is FOMO, all of these impulses and these inputs that are happening in the brain, what happens is that the amygdala gets hijacked. And this feedback loop keeps happening over and over again, and it's not necessarily, that impulse isn't necessarily getting to your prefrontal cortex, so you're not able to reason out the anxiety, and that's why the anxiety just plays upon itself, and it goes and it gets worse and worse and worse. So that's why we're going to talk about today the neurotransmitters having a positive impact on our amygdala and doing that naturally. And that's, when we're talking about doing things naturally, that's what the Dr. Janine Show is all about. And if we can stop this hijacking of the amygdala, that will only help us. And this is related to, if you know the whole story about Pavlov's dog. So with Pavlov's dog, if you know about the experiment, Pavlov would give food to the dog and then would ring a bell. So every time the food, then that stimulus of having the food and ringing the bell, you've probably heard this before, there's even a famous song about it, that the dog then, after it was entrained and the amygdala was already always knowing that that reward and bell, those two signals go hand in hand. Well, what happened was that Pavlov could just ring the bell and the dog would start to salivate, because that the brain was wired for that reward and the bell went hand in hand. Well, the same sort of thing is happening when we're talking about the amygdala and the brain, but now that rational thinking gets over flooded, and what happens is that worry loop, as it's called, will start to entrain itself, and the amygdala just sort of takes over, and this affects our neurotransmitters, it affects the decrease of our serotonin, so the good feeling hormones, and this is something that, yes, can we override this? So here's my tip. So if you think that you're in this amygdala hijacking situation, then one of my tips would be to take some deep breaths. You want to engage your frontal cortex and the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part, again, of the brain. You want to get that activated to get you out of that fear loop in the amygdala when it's just taking over. So we're going to do a quick breathing exercise together. So we're going to count to 10. And when you go into your consciousness, that's why I love yoga, I love meditation. Whenever you bring your consciousness to your breath, what happens is that you're automatically activating your prefrontal cortex, which is so important to get you out of that worry loop. So you're sort of now decreasing that hijacking of your amygdala. You're affecting your neurotransmitters in a positive way, which of course is what we want when we're stressed out and in that anxious state. And this is something that you can do on your own. So certainly after you finished watching this program, you can certainly do this on your own. And just count to 10 and take deep breaths when you're doing it. So let's all do it together. So you can close your eyes, you can, cross your legs, you can, however you're the most comfortable, but just especially if you're that anxious ridden person, this is something that you can easily do at any time on your own. So we're going to take 10 breaths. I'm going to count for you, and you're taking your 10 deep breaths. And when you breathe in, I want you to use the entirety of your lungs, which is so important. Breathing to the top of your lungs, and the lungs go right down to the bottom of your rib cage. Breathe into the lungs, but then breathe out fully, and really bring that consciousness to the breath and try not to think about anything else, okay? So breath number 1. 1. And exhale. And 2. And you can close your eyes. And exhale. And 3. And exhale. 4, 5, inhaling, and 6, inhale, and exhale, 7, and 8, inhaling, and 9, inhaling, and 10, inhaling, and exhaling. And I don't know about you, but I feel so much calmer and look at how simple that is. So it's a great tip, something that you can do at home. Share this with the youngsters. We're going to be talking about the kids as well today, and the fear of what's happened in the world and going back to school, and mom and dad getting the kids ready for school. We're talking about that in this episode as well. So make sure that you're sharing this with your friends right now if you're on social media, so that everybody can get this great information. And of course we're going to archive this so that you can watch it at a later time as well. But it's always nice to hear from you. So I don't know if anybody's chiming in yet. I'm going to sneak a peek and check really quickly to see who is here. But it's great to know that we're able to engage with you in our shows, and we love to always hear from you. So I have some other tips. So I have some beautiful herbs here. So these are the natural anti-anxiolytics, as they're called. That's the technical term, but it helps to decrease anxiety. So valerian is one of my favorite herbal medicines, and this is what it looks like. And we can take a look at it here as well on the screen. And the valerian helps to decrease the turnover of serotonin and norepinephrine in the amygdala and the hippocampus. And a study was actually done on this. And we're going to share the links to all the studies that I'm mentioning today in the description below our videos. But the valerian is really good at helping to make sure that negative feedback loop that's happening in the amygdala is turned off. So it really has that nice effect for anxiety, but this is great for sleep as well. And at the right dosage, so you've got to be a little bit careful with valerian in terms of not overdoing it, because you don't want to, have too much of a sedative effect. And certainly whenever I do formulations for herbal medicines, I always make sure that there's exactly the right amount. So if you want to link to, one of those things, then you can certainly check at the bottom of this video, and you'll get links to one of my own herbal preparations that I put together specifically for anxiety, so for stress, but to help with sleep as well. Another great herbal medicine is skullcap. So skullcap also helps to decrease that anxiety, but also helps with improving the cognitive abilities, and in one study showed that it actually enhanced the global mood. So as being a natural way to enhance the mood, of course, who wouldn't want that, and again, that's the beauty of herbal medicines, is that we don't have to worry. I'm not saying that there aren't negative side effects. You have to be careful with dosage and making sure that this is the right combination of things specifically for you, but to know that there are not some of the negative side effects which are associated with so many of the, the regular mainstream ways and the pharmaceutical ways of dealing with stress and anxiety. Another one of my favorites is lemon balm. So lemon balm, again, is very natural and helps to relieve the stress, but also has been used in children. And we can see it here in children. In one study showed that in combination with the valerian, which we saw first, helped to decrease restlessness and helped with sleep disorders as well. So that's one of the great things about lemon balm, is that it can be used in children. And passion flower is another one. So a study that they in pre-op for surgery, they actually use passion flower, because imagine going into surgery. Thankfully, I've never been in that situation, but going into surgery, I can only imagine that that causes a lot of anxiety right in the moment, that they actually found that the passion flower was very helpful even as compared to placebo, and really helping to lower that anxiety. So great and promising studies. Again, all the links for the studies will be below. And it's a great way, again, with herbal medicines to be able to help to decrease that, what I call the hot wiring in our nervous system. So when our nervous system is, and certainly through the pandemic, I think a lot of people's nervous systems had that hot wiring, and you just became very anxious. And I know everybody has different levels of comfort when we talk about, talking about stress and anxiety. And if you were already anxious before going into the pandemic, I can only imagine that completely had a negative effect on your overall health, because we know anxiety and stress is definitely related to how our organs function, and the ability for our organs to detoxify, and our overall energy levels, and the amount of pain that we feel in our bodies. So it's really important to know that, we can do things naturally. And of course, that's what this show is all about. So I'm so excited that we have a special guest. Dr. Jillian Mandich is joining us, and she is a doctor of happiness. So she is the go-to happiness expert, and is very well versed in natural medicine and really how to approach happiness. And I have a ton of questions which I'm going to go through with Dr. Jillian, and let's welcome her in. Hello, Jillian.
Hi.
So great to have you here.
So glad to be here.
This is so fantastic, and you know that I'm loaded. I've got my questions ready, so I'm going to prepare myself here. But it's so happy to, I'm so happy to have you here, because we're talking about, of course, anxiety. And I know that through the pandemic, so many people have suffered, and really maybe didn't have a natural way to turn to. I know in speaking to medical doctors that the highest rate of prescription was for anti-anxiolytics, right?
Yeah.
So to help with anxiety and to help with stress and sleeplessness, because people are just completely overwhelmed. And, looking at the brain, and I'm sure you can appreciate, how we opened up the show with the amygdala, and, so important to know that we can do things naturally. And I'm hoping that one of your answers is going to be that happiness is one of those tools that, if we can find that hopefully this will help us. So please tell us, and let's start with, what is your definition of happiness? What would you say?
Yeah, happiness is one of those things where, for you, or if you're watching right now, people, we don't really need to explain it, because we all have like a general understanding, but then when you try to take words and describe it, it gets confusing.
Yes.
Right? And it's
Exactly.
like love.
Yes.
Like, how do you describe love?
Right.
And then when you're a happiness researcher, it becomes even more difficult, because when you do a research study, you have to define all your terms at the beginning.
Yes.
So if I put my academic hat on, my
Yeah.
academic answer would be that happiness is the experience of joy, contentment, and positive well-being, combined with a sense that your life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. So that's the sort of paper answer, but essentially happiness it sort of has two components, the way I say it. It's how you're feeling now in the moment, but there's also sort of that longevity piece, because generally throughout the day we have fluctuations. We have good times, we have bad times, we have stressful times, we have anxiety causing times, but generally it's how do we feel? What's the joy? It's that meaning in life, and that purpose and contentment, I think, is another important element of it too.
Well, that makes sense. And would you say that in terms of happiness, and you said that this can happen in times of the day, so how do people rate their happiness? Like if I don't know if a study has been done, and asking a group of people, well, how would you rate your happiness? Like, I don't know how I would answer it. I know, I'm pretty happy, so I think I would be pretty high on the scale, but is this something that you've discovered? Or?
Yeah, and again, when you're doing research and you're measuring happiness, you've got to figure out how do you record it.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we'll use different validated tools. It'll be a series of questions, and then you'll get a number at the end. So say, for example, there's one tool that I use called the Subjective Happiness Scale, and you get a number between 1 and 7. And it's like, okay, you're a 4.2. But again, what does that mean? So part of it is the sort of comparing over time, and that time, that temporal element of happiness. But at the same time, one of the things is that when we measure happiness, what's really interesting is that research shows that if I asked you right now, even just on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you?
Yeah.
What would you say?
8.5.
So research would show that you're pretty good. If I was to take a tool and assess you, you would probably be pretty good at measuring your own happiness. But what we're not good at as humans is figuring out what makes us happy. So oftentimes we'll think, I will be happy when. Fill in the blank. And when I have this car, or this partner, or whatever, dollars in the bank, size, whatever. But we have this sort of erroneous thought in our brain that we will be happy when something happens. So research shows that we're good at measuring how happy we are, but not so good at figuring out what makes us happy. That's where the work is.
And isn't that the work then for people to figure out, right? And that would be, for our viewers, that would be a great tip, is to find out.
So often when I do research, if I'm doing interviews or a focus group, I'll say, okay, well, are you happy? And then they'll say, yeah, maybe, or like, are you as happy as you could be? And oftentimes they'll say no, and I'll be like, okay, well, what makes you happy? And then I'll get like blank stares. Because so often we actually don't take the time to think about what are those things in my day? What are those people or activities that make me happy? And so if we don't know what they are, no wonder that we're not so happy. Right?
And what about children? I mean, because we'll be talking about children today in this episode, and specifically how to help children through pandemic anxiety and going back to school. There's going to be a lot of, uncharted territories for them emotionally, and for the parents as well. I mean, myself being a parent, and the kids going back to school.
Absolutely.
How do we deal with this?
Yeah, and this is I do research part-time at Sick Kids here in Toronto, and especially when you look at the mental health side of it, it's very difficult. One of the things I think it's important to remember as a parent is that kids are like sponges, and they watch everything that you're doing. So if you're anxious, your kids see that. And so part of it is really focusing on us first, because happiness begins within. And then at the same time, you can't tell your kid, don't be anxious, when you're a ball of anxiety.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
So it's a family affair. It's really about, as a family, and what behaviors are you modeling for your kids? Because telling them is one thing, and that's great, but really show your actions. Are you doing the deep breathing exercises that you talk about, right?
Yes.
As a family, are we turning off the news? Are we moving our bodies? Are we going for a walk? Because that's the best way to really set your kids up for success. And childhood is really, like research shows, it's this window of opportunity where when you instill healthy behaviors in your kids at a young age, they're much more likely to continue that into adulthood. So it really, now is the time. And right now especially, it's how do we find natural solutions to help to combat anxiety so that we can live our best life.
Right. I love that. And because they always say that, your kids aren't going to do what they hear you tell them to do. It's what are you doing, right?
Exactly.
So they're modeling after us. And I definitely see that with our kids. That's why we try to be, as parents, the healthiest, right?
Yeah.
Both emotionally, but also physically. Like you said, the exercise and getting active with our kids is an important part of a healthy lifestyle because they're only going to do what they've done, right?
Exactly.
We can hope when they get older, right?
And the other thing with it is like physical health and mental health are not separate things. They're related.
Yes.
And so that's the other, especially with happiness, it's not just that it feels good. We have physical benefits when we're happier.
Right.
When you look at research and you compare happy people to unhappy people, happy people have low rates of cardiovascular disease. They have stronger immune systems. They heal faster from injury. They tend to get better sleep. So it really, all of this is the same conversation because everything is linked. And so when we focus on the physical health, it has positive implications for our mental health. And when we focus on our mental health, we see the benefits physically in our body too.
Right. So would one of your tips be then to get more happy? Let's say the person, our viewers are watching and they've been stuck on the couch and they've been watching the news and, all the negativity and the fear-mongering that's happening. What would be the tip?
So on the news thing, there's research from Sean Aker and Michelle Gillen, and they found that watching even 3 minutes of news that you perceive to be negative in the morning affects your mood for 6 to 8 hours.
Oh my gosh.
So when you think about that, it's not just turn it on,
huge.
turn it off. The residue of that lingering effect on our mental health is significant.
Right.
And so one of my, and at the same time we need to stay informed, right? So, but we also have to create boundaries around it so that it doesn't become like we're cooking in the kitchen and it's on in the background, right? Or we're sitting around and we're watching it because a lot of that evokes that fear in us. So instead, why don't we go outside for a walk, right? Like activity, physical activity, movement is really important. And especially when we look in terms of happiness, you almost get a double benefit because you are moving your body. You have the endorphins, right, our feel-good hormones that start to flow through our body when we become physically active. And at the same time, it affects our physical health as well. And what's really cool is it doesn't need to be like a 60-minute workout. Research shows that even 10 minutes of physical activity can affect your mood. And it can affect it for up to 12 hours.
Wow.
And it's cumulative throughout the day. So a 10-minute walk here, 15 minutes here, that adds up. And really, when we think about it in terms of the time for a day, we can have different bursts of activity, walking. It doesn't need to be these like high intensity things, but knowing and reminding ourselves that it really does affect our mood and our mental health.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing tip.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Get moving.
Get moving, which is something that we talk about all the time on the show here that, I don't think we've ever done a show where we haven't mentioned some type of exercise, that it's so important, but people, I think, they don't realize. And especially to hear from an expert, that there's actual research behind the benefits. It's incredible. And why wouldn't you?
Right? There's research that shows that exercise can be potentially more of a benefit than taking an antidepressant.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And when we think about the things that we can control in our life and the things that we can all find time to move our body every day. And knowing that that is impacting not only your physical health, but also your mental health. Right?
Yeah. So everyone, have to get moving. Everybody get moving, which it's so important because, in terms of, and one more question that I do have for you is happiness something that we can teach? Is it something that we can, yes, we have to get more active and we have to breathe more and do, but is it something that we can teach?
Yes.
It is.
It is. What's really cool is that when you look, happiness has a genetic element. It also has an environmental element that affects it. And there's still a big piece of our happiness that's a skill-based learned behavior. There's a piece that is our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors. And so as a happiness research, researcher, my work focuses on that piece of happiness because genetics, we can't change them. Maybe you can change gene expression, but it's very hard.
Yeah.
Environment can change, but again, very difficult. So we think about the area of opportunity when we can start to focus on our thoughts, our actions, and our behaviors. Research really shows that that can have a significant effect. So if you think about happiness like a muscle, that's kind of how I think about it. So if you wanted to get strong, you go to the gym, you exercise, and you get stronger over time. Happiness is the same sort of idea where it's like a muscle. So the more that we do things that bring us joy, that make us happy, it grows. And research shows that over time, you can not only increase your happiness, but you can sustain it at an elevated level.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
It's really interesting. And it's one of those things where it's like fitness or nutrition. Like you would never drink a green smoothie in the morning with like all the superfoods and then say, I've reached nutritional wellness, right? I'm good. I don't need to eat again. You never go to the gym and have like the best workout ever and say, I'm fit, I'm done.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
But for some reason with happiness, we think about I will be happy when. When if you switch your thinking and you realize that if you want to live a healthy life, you have to eat healthy food. And you also have to exercise and take care of your body. When you think about happiness from that lens, seeing it as a practice, as something that we're going to need to work on our entire life if we want to live a happy life, that shift in perspective really starts to give you a different attitude and perspective in terms of happiness.
Yeah.
Right? It's something we have to practice every day.
We have to practice. Practice happiness.
Yes.
We have to practice happiness. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Jillian. That was fantastic. Thank you for enlightening us. And what an interesting way to and perspective for those of us who didn't ever take that lens and look at happiness in that regard. I think things can only get better post-pandemic, and and we don't know what's to come in the world, and definitely using the tips that we've learned from you and in this show today, it will really be helpful for us. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. So that was fantastic in talking to our expert all about happiness, Dr. Jillian Mandich. We loved, that we could actually pick her brain, being an expert in happiness, and that there are, and I'm so excited that there are some practical tools that we can actually use to increase our happiness. And this is something that I've written about in my books, something called the Emotional Guidance Scale. And this is something that was coined by Esther Hicks. And there's a different scale of the emotions. Certainly our lowest emotions would be fear, grief, and depression. That's at the lowest, and I think a lot of people might be able to relate to the fear that everybody's gone through in the last little while. But going up the scale, and the tip is that if you see yourself at one of these levels of the emotional guidance scale, that you always try to bring yourself up a level. So we can see on the scale that anger is actually a higher frequency and a higher emotion than is the fear and the grief and the depression. So if someone is getting angry, that's actually at a higher level than, so once you've got the anger going, you're actually doing better emotionally. And certainly the higher that you go on that emotional scale, the better you will feel. And certainly joy and love is the ultimate emotion at the top of the scale. That's definitely where we want to be and what we attained to and the level that we attain to get to. So that's a great thing, and using the emotional guidance scale is fantastic for everyone and even for the little ones too. So if the kids are getting angry a lot and they're going through an angry phase, that's actually higher on the emotional scale than is the fear. So it's actually an indication that, if they were in a very fearful state and they're coming up in the emotional guidance scale, that they're actually doing better emotionally. Now, when we talk about kids, I know that there's a lot, and we've had a lot of questions, around here at the Dr. Janine Show about what are you doing and what's going to happen now. Nobody knows. I think with the kids going back to school, that really there is a lot of anxiety with sending the kids back to school, and nobody knows anything at this point. As much as we have, our tenets as to what's going to happen in terms of the way that it's been laid out for us, depending on which province or where you are in the world, and what the plan is with going back to school for the children, it is something that I think we need to mentally prepare ourselves as parents, but also mentally prepare the children to say that, hey, mommy and daddy don't know what's going to happen. I don't think the teachers know what happened. The principal doesn't know what's going to happen. They have a certain idea as to how things are going to play out on a day-to-day basis, but nobody really knows. And you just kind of got to learn how to go with the flow. And for some kids, that's like, my kids are like, okay, yeah, sure, mommy, that's great. But other kids I know are not, and they need to have things very set out. So keeping routines would be one of my tips, especially if you have children, that are very regimented and do better with their routines. That would be my tip, is to keep a routine and start now. You're not going to wait until, the second week of September to start these routines. You want to get their bedtime routine going now, and the early wake-ups. I know my kids have been, staying up very late and waking up very late in the morning. So start to set those routines now, knowing that school is coming, and whether you've chosen to send the kids back or they're staying home for the homeschooling, they need to have that routine, and that will help them mentally to prepare themselves. Also, it's important that the kids, if they've not been socializing with other children, that they're able to start to do that now. And if, you can slowly start to get the kids to go out to the park and in nice open spaces to have them socializing with other children. I just heard yesterday, I was talking to a friend of ours, and she knows of a woman that, a mom who kept her kids home every single day. The kids have not been out at all since the beginning of the pandemic, and that that's going to be an integration. Eventually, we have to get back into life and seeing each other again, and kids need to play with each other. So I think if you can start now, we have a couple of weeks left, at least in Canada, before the kids go back to school, is to allow them to get outside and to play with other children so that they can start to interact and have that social behavior again, which is so healthy for them. Having healthy circadian rhythms. Now, this is one of the other things that that I've talked about in other programs for adults, but for the children as well. And having the kids get up at the same time every day and going to bed at the same time every day does a lot with our hormones. And having that healthy circadian rhythm has a lot to do with our ability to deal with stress and anxiety and our hormonal release throughout the day. And so that's really important. And another tip is also for the kids is don't let them get too hungry. I know when kids' glycemic indexes, when they're they get hypoglycemic, then they start to crash with their blood glucose levels. What can happen is that they get stressed out, and that makes them anxious. And some kids are more, and adults as well, are more sensitive to this than others. So make sure that the snacks are happening, the regulated meal times are happening, so that your kids don't get too hungry, and that they are able to help to deal with that, so that now it's not a hormonal reason why that anxiety level is going up. And that's something that we can hopefully have a positive impact if you can get your kids to eat at regulated times. That will really help get the kids outside and active and exercising. As we heard our expert, Dr. Jillian, was talking about, the importance of happiness and the relationship of happiness and exercise and getting active and moving, and how that has a positive hormonal response on our bodies as well. And there are things that we can do to strengthen our kids. So certainly I know top of mind, and certainly when I wear my other cap as a vitamin formulator, top of mind for everybody was, how do we get our immune systems healthy with going back to school? So whether it's the parents or the children, certainly going back to school, we don't want to be in that situation where there's, the question of, oh my goodness, I hope I can fight this off. Absolutely. So whether that's colds or flus or pandemic related viruses, we want to make sure that we're keeping our immune system strong. And how do we do this? Well, I always go back and the healthy microbiome. So this has a lot to do with having our healthy digestive tract, and we can see here with the healthy microbiome, it's important to make sure that we have enough of the good guys, so those good friendly gut flora in the digestive tract, and they're like in our army, so our soldiers of good guys that help to combat those bad microorganisms or the viruses or whatever may be coming our way. We have to make sure that we have enough of the good guys, so that's our probiotics. to be able to fight off those bad ones. So by taking, natural probiotics, eating probiotic foods, so whether that's kimchi or sauerkraut, that may be a stretch to get the kids to have kimchi and sauerkraut. I know my kids won't eat it, so that's why we give them the natural probiotic every day to make sure that they have enough of those good guys so that they have the healthy microbiome. Certainly the unhealthy microbiome, you set yourself up and your immune system up to be able to contract some of these viruses and things more easily. And we can see this is the unhealthy microbiome, certainly something that we want to avoid. I call this the swamp. So this is something that, a lot of the negative organisms we see in here that can really wreak havoc not only on our digestion and digestive tract, but also on the ability for our immune system to be able to fight things off. So it's important that we take those probiotics every day and do that in a natural way. And, when we're talking about being healthy overall, one of the other great things that we can do with children, but also with adults, is to make sure that we're changing our inputs. So we have different inputs, both, all our senses are inputs for data, and the data is coming into our body, and how our brain deals with that data, depending if you are the anxious type or maybe you haven't been and you're becoming anxious because of what's happening in the world. That's why we want to change our inputs and do this in a positive and natural way. So one of them, when we talk about the eyes, and we talked with our expert, Dr. Jillian, about talking about, watching the news, and if that's the first thing that you see at the beginning of the day, it's probably not something that I would recommend. And I think Dr. Jillian would agree with me that watching, the fear-based news first thing in the morning to start off your day, that can have hours and hours of impact in a negative way on your entire body for hours after seeing that negative news. So we don't want to do that. We want to start in a positive way. Let our visual inputs be positive ones. So whether that's waking up to a beautiful sunrise, whether that's looking at your children, your pets in a fun and loving way, absolutely. Maybe that's a visualization. So if you want to do a natural visualization, by quieting your mind, closing your eyes, going into a sort of meditative state, doing your deep breathing, and visualize what is that beautiful visual scene that you like. That's very calming and very, supportive to your entire mental capacity and what's going on for you, hopefully, because the way you set the tone for the rest of your day will happen first thing when you wake up. So what I like to do is when I'm lying in bed, when I start my day, I like to do a meditation. It doesn't have to be long, and even if you don't know how to meditate, it doesn't have to be anything that's overly cumbersome or difficult. A visualization is great. There's a lot of things that you can tune into in terms of on YouTube and watch. In terms of great, positive visualizations, there's great aspirational, and affirmations and things that you can do, but that's a great way to start the day, and that's something that I do a quick meditation just to say, okay, where I'm at, where I'm going, it's going to be a great day, and I'm, thank you to whatever you believe in, and giving thanks for having another wonderful day. That's a great way to start the day. Then you'll see that changes your energy for the rest of the day, that you'll end up having a very positive and less anxiety-ridden day. So I want you to do that as a natural tip. Now, one of our other inputs are auditory. So certainly if you're watching the news, you're hearing all this negative stuff is going into your brain, or maybe it's your family members or the neighbor down the street that's complaining about this, that, and the other thing. Maybe it's the kids are screaming, and who knows what it is. If it's a negative impact that's happening in your auditory input, then this could be a problem. So one of the tips, especially if you have anxiety, especially if you have sleep disorders and you're having problems with stress and insomnia and you can't get to sleep, is to use something called binaural beats. So binaural beats, what it is you're sending different frequency of hertz into each of your ears. So this needs to be done with a headset, and hopefully it's a wired headset, because we're going to be talking about EMFs in just a second. And so a wired headset, and you're going to tune into, and we'll give some links at the bottom of this description, into something that is called a binaural beat. So usually it's very, relaxing music, but the way that it's been programmed by the sound engineers is that there's one frequency happening in one ear and another frequency of hertz happening in the other ear. And so your brain, the way it's been explained to me, is that your brain will make up the third beat. And it's really, really fascinating, but it has a very calming effect on your limbic system, and this has actually been studied. And what they found was that this calming effect for anxiety and even pain perception had an efficacy with relation to the binaural beat. So that's really something that's so easy to do. There's a bunch of binaural beats on YouTube, and you just listen to it. And it doesn't have to be for long. 5-10 minutes of listening to that. If you have sleep disorders, you can't get to sleep, then listen to these, and there's specific ones for sleep. Listen to that just before going to bed. It is incredible. If I didn't experience it myself, I wouldn't have believed it, that it's really that powerful. But it's really, really, a promising field and researchers are looking at the effectiveness of the binaural beats now, which is so fascinating. Now, another one is touch. So I want us to all now do an exercise, and this is called a heart entrainment exercise. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our hand over our hearts. And again, this is going to involve some breathing, and we'll just do the shorter version of this. But what we're doing is we're trying to now bring our consciousness and our energy into our heart, and we know that our heart being open is the best way to live our lives, and this is where our love comes from. And I'm sure that Dr. Jillian would talk about happiness, and having an open heart is very important as well. But having that open heart and bringing our consciousness to our heart is so important. So we're going to close our eyes again really quickly, have our hand on our heart, and we're going to take a few deep breaths. But then what we're going to do is we're going to bring that consciousness from our heart up into our brain. And what this does, and why it's called the heart entrainment exercise, is that you're bringing that energy and now that connection between those feel good, heart open feelings with the neurotransmitters in the brain, especially the amygdala. So at the top of the show, we talked about the hijacking of the amygdala, which is not the healthiest way to be, especially if we have anxiety. So bringing that up, and that heart open energy up into our brain, and allowing that energy to sit and that consciousness to sit in the brain, but then we're going to send that back down to the heart again. And this is called the entrainment of the heart, because now we're connecting brain and heart together to really open up and to dispel all of that anxiety and those negative hormones that are happening in the brain. So we'll do it for just a few seconds. You can certainly do this on your own after the show today, and I want you to use this tip because it's something that was shared with me by a very wise woman and a healer, and it's something that is life-changing. So for any of you that have the anxiety, especially related to the pandemic and the concerns of what's going on in the world, you can do this, of course, for any type of anxiety. Maybe you've got health concerns and you're not sure. This is a game changer in terms of being able to entrain that heart and have that positive impact on those hormones and the brain chemicals. Okay, so hand on the heart. We're going to take a few deep breaths. Again, breathing in. And just bringing your awareness to your heart with your hand there, sending love and positive energy to your own heart, which is something that we often don't take the time to do. We can send love out to other people, our children, our family, our husbands, our partners. We send it out, but sometimes we have to focus on ourselves as well and send that self-love, that open heart energy to your heart with some deep breaths. And now bringing that energy and that awareness up into your brain, and allow that connection of the heart energy and bringing it up into the brain area, and allow that love and that energy to fill the brain. And again, keep with your breathing. And now send that energy back down to the heart. And then sending it back up to the brain. And basically what you do is for 5 to 10 minutes, you ping pong that energy between the heart and the brain, and it's amazing. So even if you have headaches and things, I've done this myself, you know, my head was filled with probably worrisome thoughts and things, and wasn't feeling so great one day, and the added pressure of a storm coming and all that. So I did this because I thought, okay, I don't want to take anything. I want to do something naturally, and opening up that heart energy and sending it up to the brain was something that was really helpful for myself. So let me know how that works for you. I look forward to hearing your feedback on that. But that's the heart entrainment exercise, which is great, and that affects our touch. So the sense of touch, again, when we're changing our inputs, when we're talking about how to deal with the pandemic anxiety, that is one of our inputs. Another input is smell. So believe it or not, what we smell. So smell is the one sense that has the most memory associated with it, because there's only one synapse between our sense of smell and the brain. So it's a very quick reaction to go right to the brain, and that's why I love essential oils. So whether it is lavender, so lavender we know helps with decreasing anxiety, is such a pleasing and very natural way to help with that anxiety. And when we look at the lavender plant, so I have a lavender plant in our backyard, which I love, and just going up to it and smelling it is fantastic, because certainly the essential oils are concentrated of the flowers of the lavender, but it's something that you can definitely use. And I like essential oils topically. I'm not one to ever recommend really doing them internally. Yes, with a guided physician, some can be taken internally, but I love to use them externally. I find that especially when we're talking about the smell, so that synapse to the brain, to have that positive impact on our brain chemicals, that's a great way to do it. So one thing that you can do is you can either purchase an already made and already mixed lavender roller ball, but you can buy these as well as when they're empty, and you can do your own sort of mix of the essential oils. So I love the lavender with the roller ball, and this is something that you can carry, if you've got a purse or your little bag, if you're a guy, and keep it in your pocket even, but use the roller ball, and you could use it on your pulse points. The lavender is fantastic. Frankincense is another one that I love, which is great for the anxiety as well. So even that combination of the two, and usually with frankincense, you're going to want to mix it in with a carrier oil. So I like coconut oil is fantastic. But frankincense, we know from, if you're a Christian, from the Bible, was one of the big gifts to baby Jesus, and it was used as holy incense. So it was probably, different people that I read about, experts on essential oils said that this was probably worth more than actual gold as one of the three gifts given to Jesus. So really, really powerful in terms of its history, but also as a currency, and was used medicinally as well. So boswellia, which is the plant from which frankincense comes from, is something, it's a plant that actually lives in very desolate conditions. So with very little soil, not so much water, this plant grows, and the hardiness of the plant goes to show you that when you need that extra vigor and hardiness, when we're talking about anxiety, that's the way that I look at it. The property of the way that the plant grows in the first place can really help to increase your vital energy, but also to help to have that anti-anxiolytic effect, which is so important. So again, using it with a carrier oil, you probably don't want to use the frankincense on its own, but that combination of the lavender and the frankincense can really help and have that positive impact on the limbic system, which we talked about when we're talking about the amygdala in the brain, and having that positive and beneficial effect in turning off that hijacking of the amygdala. It also is very anti-aging, so frankincense is fantastic for that as well. So we talked about, a number of things. One of the things that I wanted to touch on really quickly was the EMFs. So the history of the EMF exposure is very interesting, and it has a negative impact, unfortunately. So research, as much as it's been downplayed in terms of the negative effects of EMFs, but this can really have an effect on our neurotransmitters in the brain, which of course is concerning when we're anxious already, and we have these EMFs that are coming at us, whether it is from the high power lines, whether it's from radio waves, whether it's from 5G, whether it's from satellites. We know that there's a lot of concern around the EMFs and our overall health, and this has something to do with our something called voltage gated calcium channels. So it has a lot to do with too much calcium being outside of our cells, then getting into our cells, and has a negative impact on the way that our serotonin levels are working, our dopamine and our norepinephrine, so our brain chemicals essentially are affected by this excess calcium getting into the cells. And some of the side effects are very flu-like symptoms. So side effects of this EMF exposure include nausea, fatigue, muscle pain, fuzzy thinking, and these can very much be related to flu-like symptoms. So if this is you and you're the person who's always on the phone and scrolling and checking and doing the social media and doing all of that, and if you're watching this on your phone right now, one of the things that you can do is put it onto airplane mode. So it's interesting. I was telling our friends earlier that I purchased one of the EMF readers to actually, and it's a gauge to see how much EMF is coming out of different devices in the home. I had to know, and sure enough, on the cell phone, yeah, high reading. But it's true when you do, and this is something that I've shared in other shows, that if you put your phone on airplane mode, so no, you won't receive a call. And my kids were like, "What do you mean? I won't be able to get well, who's calling you? Like, unless it's me calling you, I'm going to text you. Don't worry about it. Put it on airplane mode." And when I checked it with my reader, yes, it really did decrease that reading of the EMFs, which is so important. Some of when they were testing 5G, so this happened in the Netherlands. It was happening they did it over flat fields so that they didn't have to worry about hills and things and the 5G getting upset with the signaling. They found that, and they had reports from cattle farmers that the cows were going nuts, so they were going crazy, and they linked it to the 5G exposure. So it's something that's definitely downplayed. We're going to do a whole episode just on EMF exposure, but it's one of the things that whenever you can decrease your exposure, and we'll give some more tips in our future show all about EMFs, however you can decrease your exposure to those electromagnetic fields, it's really important to do that for your overall health, especially if you have anxiety. Just stay away from, make sure that you're staying away from your TV screens and having that distance to be able to protect yourself and not have that negative impact on your brain chemicals. So that was a great show. Thank you everybody for joining us. And we talked about in this episode, tips to really help with dealing with anxiety, specifically pandemic anxiety. I know a lot of people will be going back to work as well. So one of our tips was to certainly consider some of the herbal medicines. We looked at some of them like valerian, skullcap, lemon balm, to help with naturally decreasing the anxiety and that anxiety response in the body, and especially in those brain chemicals. We also talked about being active and really getting out there and getting exercise, and even that exercise and happiness are related to one another, and exercise is like the happiness muscles. So just like our skeletal muscles that we have to work out and go to the gym and train and exercise, we also have to work on our happiness as a muscle as well. We also talked about keeping routines. So that was a tip for the kids, but as well for the adults, that you have that normal and regular waking up, but sleep cycle as well, so to making sure that our circadian rhythm is in sync. We talked about the kids going to the park and getting active outside and having play dates so that they can start to socialize with one another again. And we talked about changing our input, so whether that's the visual, the auditory, we talked about the entrainment of the heart and the sense of touch, but also with the smell, with our essential oils was important as well. And also doing yoga. So yoga is one of the things that we didn't get to talk and show you the specific postures about, dealing with anxiety. But if you look at our previous episode on the Dr. Janine Show, our stress episode, we actually did a whole sequence. So we had a yoga expert who shared an entire sequence just for stress, and that would be really helpful. I know I've done it myself a few times, and it really just helps to reset the brain, reset your thinking, and to get you into that more relaxed state. We talked about deep breathing exercises as well. And now it comes to the point in the show when I give you the Dr. Janine truth. And my Dr. Janine truth about fear and anxiety is to really have faith in the unknown. As humans, we are in a state of always the unknown. As much as we can plan out our days and think that, okay, we're going to go from point A to B to C, even our lives, we think, okay, this is yes, we need to set our goals for ourselves, but we also have to be okay with the unknown and let go of that fear of the unknown and have faith in the unknown and what is next to come in our lives. We're all in this together, as that's so cliche, and but at the same time, I think that we were able to share some great tips on how to deal with this pandemic anxiety and how to do it naturally. So remember to always take care of your good health and to do it naturally. Thanks for joining me today.